sound, it's about to go down.
That's rolling now?
Yep.
Holy cow, man. Okay. Does my hair have enough volume? My name is THAYRONE X. I live and breathe WAAM radio, which is where we are right now. And I was asked to take part in this project, which I gladly want to do, about cars. I don't take cars apart and put them back together, although I've done a lot of that. But I want to address something I don't think is addressed anymore in this wonderful America of ours. And that is, when we were kids, cars were freedom to us. Our country is based on freedom. It's the only country in the history of mankind where a bunch of guys got together and said, let's get rid of the king, the pharaoh, the Fuhrer. We want to be free. Each man is sovereign, governs himself. And that's the basis of America, freedom. And when we were kids, we took that very seriously. We never articulated it like that, but we wanted to be free, Jack. We wanted to be able to get to where we wanted to go when we wanted to get there freely. And man, the car was the perfect solution back in the 60s. When I was 14/15 years old, the first car that came into my life was owned by a guy named Dave Harma. I don't know where he is now, but God bless him. We were all best friends in school. Dave was old enough to have a driver's license and a '56 Mercury, black and white. He called it the Gambling Hands. And we would take that car and just ride like you can't believe. First of all, we would find some kind of car wash where we'd buy him beer and he'd buy us beer. So we're out with cases of beer out in the sticks. And we were in southeast Michigan for the most part. One of the things we used to do, this is before I had a driver's license, but we'd get in that car and we'd go out from, we were all in the Livonia, Garden City area, and we'd go out to near Northville and out where there was nothing. Back then it was dirt roads. It wasn't even two-lane blacktop. And as soon as we got out away from mankind, we would take the muffler off that car. Dave would get out and get underneath it and pop the muffler off. So now it's just straight pipe, man. And we'd be doing things like fishtailing on dirt roads. And just to be dangerous, we'd cruise through the main street in downtown Northville. But where I'm going with this is, when I got a taste of that, I had to have a car. I had to have a car, and I had to have a cool car. So my very first car, when I was 16, it was dumped in my lap by my fabulous grandmother, who spoke German until she was 14 and no English, and never taught any of us kids German because there was a stigma on that back in those days. But anyway, she gave me a 52 Ford, classic, beautiful. I want to say it was did they do Crown Vics back then? I don't know. I want to say it had something to do with Victoria, maybe Deluxe. I don't know. I didn't remember. But I drove that thing into the ground. And we would get in that car. I'm 16 years old. I got a 52 Ford. And part of the freedom it enabled me to do was me and my no-count good time pals could drive from our houses into downtown Detroit and go to the National Burlesque and the Gaiety Burlesque and tell the guy at the door, yes, sir, we're 18. And they'd say, come on in. So that took me into another phase of Americana, which was old school burlesque. That car also enabled us to cruise Heinz Drive, start to finish, and all over every place else. And at that point, I had a girlfriend, and it was also enabled me to get a girl in the backseat of a car and drive in a movie. So, I mean, we're talking serious freedom now. So cars were about as Americana as it got to us. We loved it. If you've ever seen the movie American Graffiti, that spoke to me and people of my generation because that was us. That was George Lucas reminiscing his teen years and cars. And I think it was 63 or 64 that took place, I want to say. I may be up by a year, but for me, it was 65. I graduated high school in 65 at 18, but in the run-up to that, I had a 52 Ford, a 54 Ford. I had a 55 Mercury, 56 Pontiac. There was just a succession of these cars. I had two at once at one point. But, and where I'm going with that is, we used to change our own oil back then. There was no such thing as a quick lube. And we would do it out in front of the house at the curb, and we would dump the oil down the sewer drain. I mean, this was the time of just freedom. You talk about global warming, if there is such a thing. I think it's a bullshit concept. But if there is such a thing, it's our fault. Tag, we're it, man. We're dumping all down the storm drain. But anyway, that mercury I just mentioned, I remember at one point there was a hole in the windshield. I think a rock threw it up at it, and it was an actual tiny little hole with spider cracks out around it. And I kept that patched with my little sister's Play-Doh. I would take Play-Doh, and I could reach in from outside the door and around here, and I would smash Play-Doh, and it would harden. And I'd leave it there until that busted off, put more Play-Doh, and I never fixed the windshield. The other thing these cars enabled us to do, and again, cars were freedom. It enabled us to drive from Detroit area to Toledo when we were 18. And I got to tell you, we weren't raging drunks back then, but alcohol was a pretty big facet in everybody's life in the 60s, in high school and out. So we would drive to Toledo because down there you could drink at 18 legally. So we would drive down in our cars to Toledo, and we had in our glove boxes colored pencils, because if the mark for being 21 was orange, you'd get yourself in the door on whatever black or brown was at 18, and then you'd go out to your car and figure out what the 21 was. You'd color it with orange. And we used to go to clubs down there like the Faba, the Peppermint Lounge. Many people probably remember that. Cars were the way you got to where the action was. That was it. You didn't take Uber. You didn't sit home and look at it on a computer screen. You were in the mix. You wanted to be in the mix. You wanted your young blood boiling. Another aspect of having a car was, and I remember this specifically with my 54 Ford, we would drive down to a club in Detroit on Woodward Avenue. It was called The Village. And The Village was where all the secret handshake A-class musicians from Motown and other places would hang out. They had a guy on stage, I think it was the Big Bubble Orchestra, but a lot of them were the Motown session guys, and they were moonlighting, and then acts would come through like Geno Washington, Nathaniel Mayer, which was Village of Love, all that stuff. And this was a stone-cold black R&B club, and we would go down there and hang out till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. There was no alcohol. But in retrospect, and we didn't really take it seriously back then because this was pre-hippie marijuana drug stuff. It was just at the cusp of that coming in. But I know I smelled marijuana in that place, even though I didn't know what it was. But this was one of the coolest R&B clubs ever. And some years later, I remember, again, using a car to get a bunch of equipment into a bar to play music with my band, the Witch Doctors, we were in a bar called Harry's in Taylor. And a guy shows up at the bar as I'm talking to the bartender, and he looks at me, he says, "Are you Thayrone?" And I said, "Yeah," and we became fast friends real quick and went over and met his friends. They were in from Los Angeles. And I know I'm somewhat free associated with this kind of interesting story. He said he was out in L.A., and believe it or not, Andrew, I want to say X, last name, that name is, I know his last name, but I'm not going to name it. He was one of the biggest in Spice Network, which was one of the biggest purveyors of pornography in hotels around the world. And if you ever got the XXX porn in a hotel, it's his company. Anyway, we're talking because he was a huge fan of my music show, the Bone Conduction Music Show, which can be heard at THAYRONE.com. THAYRONE.com. And we became fast friends, and we're talking. And he starts talking about the Village. And I said, "Man, you went to the Village?" And he said, "Yeah, we used to hang out there." And I said, "Man, we were there all the time. It was me, my best friend, and our girlfriends. The four of us were there pretty much on a Friday or a Saturday, or sometimes Friday and Saturday." He says, "Oh, you were the other white people in the room." I just cracked up because that was it. It was a secret handshake. Nobody knew about this place. We were like basically high school kids, just high school and just after. So there's no moral to that story. But again, all of this was enabled because when we were young kids, we had cars. We had the Americana of Americana, the automobile. So I don't know. There's 1,000 more stories like this. I've had Volkswagen buses. And back when I learned to drive, you actually had to take driver's ed, and you had to be able to not only drive a stick, 3 on the tree, you had to be able to park on a hill, parallel park. So I know that. I used to live in San Francisco, and I could parallel park my car on a hill in San Francisco. I was so damn good at it, I used to say, I could park this thing in your back pocket without wrinkling your pants. And I used that later when I ended up driving a school bus at one point. But anyway, the thing about cars that will always be dear to my heart, and I'm old, I don't think that's carried forward these days. It's carried forward in some, but back then, you couldn't find a kid who was 14, 15, 16 years old that did not want an automobile and would work night and day to get it. I don't know if that's the radio studio or what, but anyway, that's about it. I think I've wasted enough of your time. Thanks for paying attention to this, and make sure you support this video channel.
Tell by the sound it's about to go down.